So I am super excited to introduce Carrie Brown-Lima. The reason that RISC exists is because Carrie asked this really important question several years ago of what are the implications of climate change for invasive species research. Carrie is the director of the New York Invasive Species Research Institute, and she is talking today. The title of her talk is Addressing Invasive Species and Climate Change Through Translational Research and Partnerships. Carrie?
Okay, let me just get my camera on as well. Thank you so much, Bethany, for the introduction, and welcome everybody. This is a really exciting day, and I'm really honored to be able to kick off the 5th annual RISCC Symposium. It's hard to believe it's been 5 years, but I'm really just so impressed by this group and by everything we've been able to produce and all the progress that we've made. It's been such a pleasure to be a part of this journey. Everything I'm talking about today is actually a collaborative effort of Bethany Bradley, Tony Lamorelli, my co-founders, and the amazing RISC leadership team, as well as all the contributions from you all in the audience who have really helped us develop the RISC network. So today, in the past, we've kicked off our symposium by giving some sort of overview of the science of the topic. Today, I'd really like to just kick off by giving a little bit of background, talking a little bit about the RISC Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network, and give you a sneak peek into where we're going from here. And so I'd also like to give a shout out in particular to Emily Gisco, who has dedicated a lot of hours into making this virtual symposium a reality. So even though we can't be together, it's wonderful to have you all online. And so thanks for that, Emily. Oops, sorry. So just thinking a little bit about the basis for which the RISC network was established, I'd just like to delve a little bit into this idea of translational research. And we know that invasive species research is increasing. We see it everywhere. There's multiple publications coming out per day on it. However, despite this fact that we have all this new research, a lot of the times this research isn't actually connecting to the people who need it. So this is called the knowing-doing gap, and there's a gap between research and practice so that the scientific information is accumulating, but not getting incorporated into management actions. This is not just recognized by the managers who are out there needing the information, but it's also been something that we've been evaluating in the scientific literature itself, trying to figure out why this gap exists and how to overcome it. Part of the problem is that we often take a loading dock approach with research. We dump it all into scientific journals, and then it sits there and kind of waits to trickle down into the hands of people who might use it to make decisions. And so this isn't exactly an effective approach because just like trickle down economics, this idea that things that will just randomly get to the people they need isn't a reality. Part of the reason why it's not getting into the hands of the people that need it was actually identified many times, but MassTech in 2014 did a really nice job of asking plant managers where they got their information and realized that most of them are not going to the peer-reviewed journals, but are instead looking to their peers and to informal conversations, synthesized literature, and conference and symposiums. Another reason why that there's this gap and that science isn't being applied is oftentimes the question that's being asked isn't actually going to generate the information that the end users, the decision makers, the managers, the policymakers need. So sometimes like trying to squeeze a round peg into a square hole. And so this MassTech in 2015 also published some research showing that not only were managers not accessing the information, that we scientists weren't producing the information that they needed. And so we're not producing enough research on some topics and too much on others. And so this really leads us to the conclusion that managers and researchers actually need to talk to each other so that they can communicate their needs, and that the research can actually be tailored and produced together with the managers. But this is actually a process of construction of a network, and also it takes work and time to make this happen. And so in recent years, we've been really starting to think about this as a field, this field called translational invasion ecology. And it's something that this RISC group and others such as NQuist et al. Have been thinking about a lot. And it's an approach that embodies an intentional and inclusive process in which researchers, stakeholders, and decision makers collaborate to develop and implement research via joint consideration of the sociological, ecological, economic, and political context of the problem of invasive species. And a key piece and kind of the glue that brings together these two often very separate worlds is that of a boundary spanner. So an institution that can play the role in bringing together these different sectors of scientists and decision makers, and they convene, they translate, they collaborate, and they mediate the process. And so as we're thinking about a topic as complex and multifaceted as climate change and invasive species, two huge problems on their own, bring them together, and it's a giant problem, there's a lot to be learned and a lot to be communicated about the topic. And so it really has taken us all a while to start piecing this information together. But back in it was in 2016, and Bethany mentioned in her introduction that the director of the New York Invasive Species Research Institute, work in a boundary standing role. And we, in talking with our stakeholders, the Invasive Species Network here in New York State, this question from managers of how to incorporate climate change into invasive species decisions kept coming up. And this was reinforced by the executive order, the amendment to the executive order that came out in 2016, where President Obama mandated federal agencies to incorporate invasive species, climate change into invasive species decisions and actions, yet it wasn't really defined what that looked like. So I was really lucky that when I was able to connect with Bethany and also with Tony Lamorelli from the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, that we actually came together and really said, we need to address this issue. And so, and started trying to figure out how we'd actually do that. So we brought together our networks of invasive species managers and policymakers throughout the Northeast and had an exploratory workshop to try to understand the information needs of these folks and also develop a strategy to address those needs. So with that was the founding of the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network. And over time, our mission has developed to reduce the compounding effects of invasive species and climate change by synthesizing relevant science, communicating the needs of managers to researchers, building stronger scientist-manager communities, and conducting priority research. And although the three of us kicked this off, we've had amazing contributions from what we call our leadership team, which consists of a lot of students, postdocs, researchers from UMass, and some from Cornell, as well as we're lucky to start having managers such as Nancy join us to help keep us on track with our objectives and our work. And so our network has grown now to nearly 500 invasive species practitioners, educators, and researchers. And this isn't exactly up to date. There might be a few of the team that are missing from it, but this just gives a little glimpse into the great group we have working on this. And so really all the work we do fits into this structure, the steps of translational invasion ecology that we actually worked on together with the leadership of Tony Lin to really walk ourselves through it so we know which steps we need to take in order to produce the research that managers really need. And so what I'm going to do then for the next few minutes of my talk is really go through, we started here in 2016, now we're in 2021, a lot has happened along the way. But what we've really done is work in 4 main areas that I'd like to highlight, just so you're aware of all the accomplishments that this group has made, and also the resources that are available to many of you if you're interested, or potential collaborations that you could make to address some of the questions that we haven't addressed yet. So really, I spoke about the role of a boundary spanner, and really this is a real important first step to kick off. And I would say that we consider ourselves a boundary spanner because we're looking to identify the problem and identify the stakeholders. And so in order to, we use a platform, main platforms we use for communication on a daily basis are our listserv and also our website, where all of our information is posted. But really early on in the process, Eve Bury, who is a postdoc, or actually no, a PhD student in Bethany's lab, really wanted to understand what the managers were needing and what they were thinking about this topic, because it was pretty new and a lot of people hadn't really dove deep into it yet. And what she found was that lack of information was a really big barrier to incorporating climate change into these invasive species management actions. And we also looked at these 2 main areas where we, as a group of scientists and boundary spanners, could contribute. So accessing the information, and as well as making availability of information, making the information, producing the information. And she also reinforced what I mentioned earlier that MassTech found was that by publishing this just in the primary literature, it wasn't going to reach our audience. So we'd have to really work in these other areas by promoting these interactions, conversations through meetings like this one, and through some management documents and reports and websites as well. And so she also took it in even a little deeper to understand what the topics were that people were most interested in learning about, which I'll touch on a little bit later as well. So once we kind of knew where people were getting their information, what they were looking for, and what kind of information, we really started trying to find this information, whether it already existed in the literature and that it just wasn't available in a digestible format to the people who needed it. And so one of the things we did was starting to take individual research articles and summarize them. So taking the scientific literature, reading it, distilling it, picking out any sort of management implications or take-home points, and sending them out on our listserv. So we call these our management, our research summaries. And then taking that one step further, instead of just individual papers, we would synthesize multiple papers on some of the key topics that our audience, our stakeholders were pointing out that they wanted information on. And so we call these our management challenges. And we've produced a number of these. They're all available on our website, and also you can search them on the web. And although we know that scientists are producing a lot of really valuable information, we also know that there's a lot of information already out there in the managers and the folks that are on the ground with expertise, but they're just not putting it on paper and have a means to communicate it. And so we've also done surveys and conducted workshops, such as we did at 2019 at the North American Invasive Species Management Association Conference, to learn what actions people were already taking. And so we also summarized and compiled those in our management challenge we call Taking Action. And so what we really found, and just as an example here, is that some of the things that we can do to plan ahead, such as timing our management, could change. These were actually messages we got from the managers that, and also trying to understand how efficacy of some of the existing management techniques could change over time. We also found that people were really interested to try to understand which species were likely to emerge and what types of native species they could use for restoration that would adapt to climate change. So once we've synthesized a lot of the information that exists, we also saw that there's a really big need as part of this process to identify original research questions and pursue that research. So within this group, there's been a lot of focus on making some of these topics addressing some of these topics that came up in Eve's research. And one of them in particular that's come up a lot, and I just wanted to use this as an example, as one of the ways that we took the recommendations from the managers and turned that into research, was looking at range shifting species and hotspots. And so I'm just going to breeze over a couple of slides quickly because we actually are, Tony Lynn Morelli is going to be giving a talk on this later today. So we know, for example, that the climate is changing and there's new ecosystems, and that species are actually moving, and they can occur for many species. And so if we could take some of this knowledge that we have, some of these models that we have predicting which species would move, and this comes from research from Jenica Allen and Bethany Bradley back in 2016, we can actually use that to think ahead and take some of those preventative measures that were mentioned in our management documents earlier. And so this is exactly what the group has been doing, is using these projections, creating these lists, and then communicating these to the management agencies, such as here in New York, where we assess species. And then when they come up as something that could be a threat that's highly invasive, we prohibit them. And so this is actually a way we can translate science to policy. And so we actually took this, Jenica partnered with EdMap to take this one step further to say, not only can we generate the list and hand it to you, but she created a tool online with support from the Northeast IPM Center to be able to have people go in and generate their own list. So despite this information, we do see that the invasive species lists are still, regulated species for each state are still reactive once a species is already there. And we know we really need to think ahead and be proactive. And so some of our managers in our network were asking us, how could we actually incorporate climate change into some of our risk assessments and make these part of our prohibited list before they even get here and start causing a problem. So the group actually has been working on this for the past year or so and looking at which species are regulated in which state, and we're seeing that adjacent states often have very different lists and aren't working together to plan for these upcoming invasions, and that we really need to bring people together. So before we all had to separate physically, we actually managed to have a really great workshop with Northeast Plant Council members from 7 Northeast states to address this topic and think how we could help them work together and be proactive to avoid these climate shift species. And just as a note, this original paper was published on proactive management, but also was translated into a management challenge that's available on the RISC website. So finally, moving away from the original research, I just wanted to touch a little bit on the fact that the RISC network is really working to communicate and implement some of the research that's out there. And so we have been hosting webinars. In fact, in 2020, we hosted 2 webinars that had over 180 people attend. And these webinars actually are not just researchers talking to the rest of us to share their knowledge, but we usually try to have people from the management world able to share their expertise together with the scientists who can share their research. And so this is a big push for RISC, and something that we're really promoting 2 to 3 times a year. Another thing is, such as this virtual conference that we're at today, is we're really trying to introduce people to each other, have managers talking to each other, talking to researchers, having researchers understand the issues. And so our annual symposium and our workshops are really a great place for that to happen. And so you'll see on the agenda that we actually, instead of just having talks all day, that we have workshops, 2 workshops available, actually 3 workshops available, as well as a networking session. And we hope that even though we can't be together in person, that we can still continue to promote these interactions and get more people involved. And I just wanted to give a shout out and a congrats to the group. One of our members of the team put together a RISC 2020 year in review, and it really, when you put it into numbers, it's really so impressive. And I just wanted to acknowledge all the productivity that this group has had. This is nobody's prime research. Nobody's getting paid to do this work. We all do it as part of our bigger picture assignments and tasks. And so the fact that we've been able to produce 4 management challenges, 16 research summaries, there's almost 300 people registered for this symposium. We've had one of our management challenges alone had 1,800 downloads on climate smart gardening. We've produced 3 original research articles, and we have a number of new initiatives that are coming up. And so just congrats to all the hard work of the RISC group, and please do check out our website because all of this information is available there. And as Bethany mentioned at the beginning, through this process of developing RISC, we realized that climate change and invasive species are 2 pretty overwhelming issues, and climate change creates new risks yet for invasive species to take hold. But it also has created this really unique opportunity for us to work together and to share knowledge. And that through this group, we've seen how networking and bringing people together, we've really been able to tackle this really large issue and start advancing knowledge and knowledge sharing on this newer challenge. So before I wrap up here for the day, I wanted to think a little bit ahead as we're planning for the next 5 years. We've had a really productive 5 years so far, and we've got a lot of initiatives up and coming. And one of the ways that we really hope to, so if you're out there and you're coming from the climate change aspect, we've talked a lot with invasive species managers about incorporating climate change in. And now we'd really like to start thinking about how we could incorporate invasive species into climate change plans. And so we invite you to reach out to us if this is a field that you're working on, or if this would be something you'd be interested in engaging in. We also plan to continue to produce original research. We received 2 new grants from the USGS to fund research on vulnerable habitats as well as climate smart management options. So keep an eye out for that. We'll be continuing to synthesize research on some of those top topics that were identified by Eve and from our and the requests from our network. So you'll be seeing more of those coming across your email. We are looking to engage additional researchers that are conducting relevant research to climate change and invasive species. We have a lot of plant expertise within our core group, and we're trying to expand on and fold in new researchers, such as those working with forest pests, aquatics, and others. And so as we start trying to reach out, we'd appreciate anyone who works in that area to reach out to us as well, because we'd love to have more people engaging on these issues. And finally, and very excitingly, we're actually expanding outside of the Northeast. So before I pass the microphone along to our new RISC members to give a little update on what they are doing and what their plans are, I just wanted to note that due to all the great stuff that's happening here in the Northeast, we're really excited to join forces with folks from North Central, Pacific Islands, and the Northwest to expand and help support the development of their RISCs there. And if you're looking for more information on what we've been working on or how the process that we've used to develop the RISC, we've also just recently published our guiding principles, and a lot of what I was talking about today can be found in there. And finally, I just wanted to thank you all for coming to this kickoff of the Northeast RISC 5th Symposium. If you're not already on our listserv, this is a collaborative effort for everyone, so we invite you all to join, and we look forward to spending the next couple of days with you. So thanks so much. And with that, I can take any questions.
Thanks, Carrie. So I'll ask anyone who has questions. You can see a Q&A at the bottom. So please feel free to type in a question there. We've got, upwards of 10 minutes for Carrie to answer questions, including anything that she covered that you'd like a little bit more information about. So Carrie, I'll ask a first question, which is, does citizen science have any role in your information gathering process?
Yeah, so I would say that a lot of what anybody is welcome to join the RISC. And so a lot of what we have worked on so far has been working with managers and policymakers and those that are actually in the field doing this as a profession. However, from there, we would love to engage further with citizen scientists. We've also really started reaching out to native plant groups and other groups that could be a part of sharing in the information sharing process, as well as providing insight and input to our direction. So we aren't directly working with citizen science unless I'm missing something, Bethany, so feel free to jump in, but definitely welcome that as a future step.
Super, thanks. Yeah, I think we've talked a lot in the network about who different stakeholder groups that we could reach out to. So if you guys have ideas about citizen science groups that we should engage, we're open to that too. Another question. If you have, if RISC has research issues that managers and stakeholders would like to help with, who should they reach out to?
Oh, that's great. We are always looking for managers to engage. We've been so grateful over the years. We would never have come as far as we've come without that partnership. So you can, there is actually an email, a RISC email. Please shoot us an email. You can send any of us directly an email as well. Join our listserv, and you can post on our listserv as well. But yeah, please do reach out, and we are really excited to have new people on board.
Another question is about policymakers. So whether you at NISRI or RISC generally is interacting with policymakers directly, and if not, what types of topics might the network bring to policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do interact somewhat. That's an area where I could see a lot of room for expanding. That's something that we've actually talked about in our strategic planning the coming years, is to be able to produce information that would be more directed specifically at policy. I would say a lot of what we've interacted with so far are those related to listing species and the process of prohibiting species and the policies surrounding that. But we would welcome input on that for sure. So that's an area that I think will be in our near future for working more closely on.
Super. Then another question, and maybe this is from Mackenzie Zerniak, and maybe I'll ask them to elaborate a little more on what they're thinking about this. But the question was generally whether we're collecting data from iNaturalist or IMAP invasives.
Yes, I think you could probably speak to that better than I could, Bethany, because I know you and Jenica have specifically used IMAP data in some of your models. So you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so we're not collecting data, but we are using the data that you all are collecting quite a bit. And that's really important in terms of trying to understand. I mean, so as you know, using IMAP, using iNaturalist, using EdMaps is another source that a lot of folks are using, becomes really important for identifying sort of the first time a species arrives in an area that you care about. But what we also are really interested in is using those data to try to model, where those species are currently or could be currently, as well as where they could be in the future. And I suppose I can put in another plug there that IMAP and EdMaps both have, I don't know the iNaturalist database as well, but I know that both IMAP and EdMaps have recently incorporated estimates of relative abundance in those data collections, as well as sort of opportunities to collect absence data, which are not maybe as important for detecting sort of the first hits or the first time a species arrives, but become really important on the modeling side of things for us to understand where those invasions are really likely.
And I should comment that IMAP and EDMAP have been great partners in always trying to participate in our symposium, presenting new information and engaging with us. So a shout out to them as well.
Yeah, those data I think are some of the critical ones that we've been using. We still have time for a couple more questions if anybody has them. But in the meantime, maybe Carrie, I'll ask you about what you had a list of things for that sort of next 5 years. Do any of those come out as ones that you're most excited about?
Well, actually, so I'm really excited to actually expand our researcher network as well. We've been really grateful for our managers, and I feel like, really trying to bring in new research, new ideas to complement the work we've already been doing. That's actually all of them I'm excited about, but that's one that's particularly exciting to me, as well as our new projects that are coming up. So.
Fantastic, thanks. So I'm not seeing any new questions. So if you don't mind, oh, actually, I just got 2 new questions. So we still have 3 minutes. So I'm going to take the first one of these. So Jerry is asking or saying that data handling aggregation rather than diversification in terms of the number. Sorry, I need to read this question before I can ask it.
This one might be more for you anyways, Bethany.
Okay, so maybe I'll go to the next one. Yeah, so the next one is about asking about our taxonomic focus. So you'd mentioned broadening the taxonomic focus as a goal. It looks like a lot of the primary focus of the research is on invasive plants. Do we have research or provide data on invasive animals?
So yeah, that's something that we started really with a stronger focus on invasive plants, simply because there was a lot of that expertise within our core group. However, Tony Lin is a mammologist and has worked extensively with species moving due to climate change, not necessarily invasive, but we are looking to engage with others. We do have a invasive forest pest expert on our team now, which was a great addition. And yeah, so if you are interested, please do reach out to us, because we are looking to expand to other taxonomic groups.
Yeah, I think the plant focus is my fault. Emily is asking, do you think it's important to conduct an ecological cost benefit analysis on invasives? So essentially that sort of could benefits ever outweigh the costs? And should we be considering that when we're thinking about range shifting species, for example?
Yeah, that's a great question, not just about range shifters, but just about invasives in general. I do think a cost benefit analysis on invasives is a great tool to just prioritize which ones we should be concerned about and which ones we should be less concerned about. So I do think it is important, for sure.
Thanks. Yeah, and then I think this last question is sort of a similar focus of that sort of cost benefit types of questions. This one is focused on thinking about how to influence policymakers in the climate change mitigation or climate change adaptation realm, who might be more focused on sort of carbon storage than on other ecosystem processes or diversity or native species. How do you think we balance that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And in fact, a recent study, I'm not sure if it came out yet or it will be out soon, that the Nature Conservancy was conducting together with the Carrie Institute and others. We're really looking at how carbon how invasive forest pests are impacting carbon storage and how to deal with that. So I think that's a great topic to bring up to policymakers, and actually, provides even more support for us to make priorities of some of these invasives and preventing their introduction to begin with.
Super. Yeah, and not only forest pests, there's a study that I really like that came out of the Midwest that was on, I think it was one of the bush honeysuckles, so some sort of Linicera and its impact on forest productivity. So, so I think that there are potential win-wins there.
Maybe that'll be another management challenge down the road.
That sounds great. You guys are giving us ideas. Super. Carrie, do you mind stopping your screen share?
Nope.
We